Welcome to my journal for racism, religion, and gender in sports. In this journal, I explore how issues like racism, faith, and gender identity continue to shape the world of sports today. From the lasting impact of racial inequality to the role religion plays, especially in communities facing hardship, to the heated debates around transgender athletes competing in women's sports. Each topic reveals how deeply sports connects to deeper struggles in society. Through real stories and honest reflection, my goal is to better understand the emotions, challenges, and complexities behind these important conversations. This journal is not about picking sides, it's about listening, thinking deeper, and recognizing the human stories behind the headlines. So, for the first class of racism, election, and gender, we just went through an introduction on the course of time. So, provide to basically inform us and to be made of assignments and presentation. Um, Personal assignment, which I believe would be an essay, a debate, and I think the rest of us would be made up in class discussions. And we got into a simple discussion about the difference between luck and destiny. Well, I personally think that um, luck is also something that does happen in the spur of a moment, and destiny is something that kind of created based on the path, the steps that a person has been on throughout their life. However, I do believe that within destiny that we need a bit of luck to reach the um, heaven or divine plan, as you want to say. Right, so for this class, we basically had a discussion on if racism is real. And well, I believe racism is real. I believe it's a system of advantages and disadvantages based on race, and it affects people's lives in areas like the education, the jobs, and even probably their health, right? I believe it could be direct, as in like racial slurs or like hate crimes, and it could also be indirect, like bias hiring practices or racial profiling. Because I personally find it weird that a job will ask you what was your ethnic background. I don't understand like what that had to do with me personally getting a job. And well, when looking at local examples, you can tell that like within Trinidad and Tobago, it is a real thing. Like the main example is the tension that is arise during elections time or politics between the Afro Trinidadians and Indian or Indo Trinidadians. In Trinidad, the voting patterns are heavily influenced by um, ethnic loyalty, as we could say, because the UNC party is viewed as the Indian party and the PNM party is viewed as the Negro party or Afro party, right? So within when politics arise or when election times arise within the country, we often see an increased level of racism amongst the population. And I personally don't believe that that's just elections, the energy of elections or the election stuff. I genuinely believe that that's something deeply embedded within um, the different races within our society, and it mainly becomes prominent during political arguments or political discussions. So for the third class, we watched a debate between two Trinidadians, Cujo and Mirage. And within the debate, it basically was shedding light on how the term racism is often played down when used in discussions about things like ethnic advocacy and needing a deeper understanding of the implications of racism in a multi-ethnic society. Right. Kudra Miraj also talked about when taking a look at a specific ethnic group, it could lead to perceptions of bias. Um, it's also essential to differentiate between genuine racism and sincere advocacy. Both speakers also portrayed the perception that resources like political power are unevenly distributed, often favoring one ethnic group over the other. And this also points to long-standing concerns about how history and demographics shape political reality where each ethnic group feels marginalized by the other ethnic group rise to power. They also critique the shortcomings of the Relations Committee in generating widespread change, right? And by acknowledging this, it signals a need to radically rethink how such initiatives are structured and communicated in order to resonate um, with the general public effectively. Both the speakers, Kudrow and Maraj, called for ongoing dialogue across communities, suggesting that constructive interactions could lead to greater understanding and potentially mitigate tensions that arise from historical grievances. These insights remind audiences that dialogue is a tool for healing and reducing misunderstandings. So for this class, we looked at an essay titled Why Racial Inequality Still Exists by Glenn Laurie. And in this, he tried to explain, even though that laws have been changing and things have improved since the civil rights movement, racial inequality is still a big problem. I think he was mainly speaking about within the United States. So in the essay, he says that there are two main ways people think about the issue. One way is the bias narrative, meaning people believe racism and unfair treatment from the system is the main reasons why Black people still struggling to this day. And he believed that things like discrimination in jobs, he believed that things like discrimination in jobs, housing, and schools play a part in this. The other thing that he mentioned is the development narrative, which looks at what's happening inside the community itself. It mentions things about poor schools, unsafe neighborhoods, and not having enough support to grow and succeed or be the best version of oneself. He also says that both views are important, and it's not just about unfair treatment now, but also about what people have or don't have to build their lives or make their lives better. He highlights that many Black communities don't have the same chances to grow because of how society is currently set up, even if there's no direct racism, the system still needs to hold the system still holds people back. Sorry. And basically, to wrap it up, he says that we need to stop arguing about which side is right. And if we really want to fix things, we have to look at both the outside problems and the inside struggles and work together to give everyone a fair shot. So with this class, we started with a conversation from Albert. He was basically comparing sophistry with Socrates. Right? I was a bit distracted in this class, so after class I did a bit of research and reading upon the topic. And basically, what I learned from it is that the sophists were teachers who got paid to teach people how to argue well and to win debates. And they didn't really care if something was true, they just care about sounding smart and convincing others. And for them, truth was flexible. And if you could argue your side well, they basically believed that this was good enough, right? Socrates, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He didn't really he believed in asking deep questions to find the real truth, not just to win the argument. He would walk around Athens, which is the capital of Greece, I believe, asking people things like, what is justice or what does it mean to live a good life? And he didn't give answers. He made people think for themselves. The duality between them is simple. Sophists cared about the appearance, while Socrates cared about the truth. Sophists use clever language to persuade people, and Socrates used questions to understand. The difference between them is still important to this day. Do we speak just to sound right, or do we search for what's actually true? In a world full of opinions, Socrates reminded us to dig deeper, to question, to think, and to care more about the wisdom than winning. So in this class, Brother Arthur had a bit of discussion with us on poor people being more religious, and I kind of agree with this because since I was young, I kind of noticed it. I noticed that more well-off people are less religious than the people who are struggling, right? And somebody who from the ghetto and currently lives in the ghetto, and also grew up within poverty, I mainly agree with this, right? And the reason why I believe that poor people are often more religious is because oftentimes when life is hard, people naturally look for hope, strength, and meaning. And religion basically provides most of this, right? So think about it. If you're struggling with money, you can't afford certain things, you feel stuck in a tough situation, religion could offer some kind of comfort to you. It is often tell people that even if life is unfair now, there's a bigger purpose at the end or a bigger purpose coming. It often gives people the belief that things can get better either in this life or the next life. And next thing to know too is religious communities can act like support systems. So things like churches, mosques, temples, they are people normally view them as more than just places to pray. They're places where people come together, share food, help each other out, and feel like they belong. And in instances where you don't have much, that kind of community can mean everything to a person. Even sometimes when people don't have access to things like good education, healthcare, therapy, and all, religion could sometimes fill this gap within their life. It gives them answers to the bigger questions like why bad things happen to them or why bad things happen. And it helps them cope with pain, loss, and uncertainty. This class, we had a small little discussion about woke culture. So, what woke culture basically is, woke culture is about being aware or being awake. That's the fancy term woke culture, right? To social problems like racism, sexism, inequality, and injustice. The word woke originally came from the Black communities within the United States, and it meant staying alert to discrimination and standing up against it. However, over time, the idea grew bigger, and now being woke can mean supporting all kinds of causes, from LGBTQ rights to feminism to climate change and so on. Right? It's really about paying attention to how society treats different groups of people and trying to make things more fair and inclusive for everyone. But, however, there's also a lot of debate around woke culture. Some people think, including myself, it's gone a bit too far, right? I believe that it's become more about calling people out and canceling others over small mistakes and being oversensitive, right? Simple things like you can't. All right. To me, the best comedy or the best jokes are made about um, serious matters. If you look at the best comics, Kevin Hart, Eddie Murphy, and so on, Adam Sandler, they make jokes about things they really shouldn't be making jokes about. I personally don't believe that not as jokes, but people can make mistakes. Sometimes people's messages can be portrayed wrong in the media, especially. And I personally don't believe that somebody should be cancelled or lose their entire livelihood, losing their job, and things like this, or even being charged and sent to jail for simple things like this. And I think like main um the main reason behind cancel culture is just people being offended and being a bit too sensitive. Like it's like they blow simple things out of proportion. And they feel some type of I don't know if it's shame they're feeling because they don't agree with someone's opinion. To me, you shouldn't even be cancelled, fired, or charged because you have an opinion that probably don't align with the opinions of the rest of society or majority of society. This class started with a discussion between comparing the difference between patriarchy and matriarchy. So firstly, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is a system where men hold the power in society, including all leadership positions in politics, business, and even within their families. In these systems, and even in these systems, men are often seen as the primary breadwinners, decision makers, and authority figures. And most societies throughout history, including much of the modern world, have been under this system. A matriarchy system, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's a system where women hold the power. Women might have more authority in decision making, leadership, and even inheritance. While true matriarchies are rare in history, there are some societies where women play the dominant role, particularly in certain indigenous cultures. My personal thoughts on patriarchy versus matriarchy is that both systems have their strengths and weaknesses, but it's important to realize that no society is fully ideal when it's dominated by one gender over the other. Though patriarchies have historically provided men with more power and control, they have also led to inequality, sexism, and a lack of opportunities for women. And this has created an unbalanced societies where half of the population is often restricted by gender rules and expectations. A matriarchy could provide a different approach, focusing more on values like nurturing, community, and inclusiveness. But just like patriarchy, if women are in charge and it leads to women excluding men or having their own forms of discrimination, it could create a similar imbalance. So in my opinion, the key is balance. Rather than restrict matriarchy or patriarchy, we need a society where everyone, regardless of their gender, has equal opportunities, rights, and respect. True equality comes when both men and women work together to create systems that are fair for everyone, where leadership can come from anyone, and we move beyond the traditional power structures based on gender. In this class, we take a look at a video titled The Human Experience Behind Being a Transgender Athlete. Right, so this is just me basically summarizing what the video was about, and then at the end, I'll give my opinions. So basically, recently the debate over transgender women in women's sport became more intense, and the story of Riley Gaines, who is a former All-American swimmer, and Leah Thomas, who is the first openly transgender NCAA Division I champion, has highlighted just how emotional and personal the issue could be. On one side, we have Riley Gaines, who feels that allowing transgender women to compete in women's sports is unfair, and she argues that the physical advantages some transgender women might have, particularly those who went through male puberty, can create an imbalance in competition. And this has led to legislative actions like the law signed by Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, banning transgender women from competing in women's collegiate sports. On the other side, we have Leah Thomas, who transitioned to live as her true self. She argues that her transition wasn't about gaining an advantage. She says that the presence of transgender women in sport doesn't harm women's sports because transgender women are a small minority and most don't dominate. She's hopeful about the future, but regulations like the one banning athletes who went through male puberty from competing in women's events dashed her Olympic dreams. My personal view is that the issue is incredibly complex. On one hand, I understand the concerns about fairness in competitions. Sports are meant to test natural abilities, and when physical advantages come into play, it can feel like competition is no longer equal. On the other hand, the emotional and psychological toll this debate has on transgender athletes who are already dealing with so much can't be ignored. This is a matter of human rights, and every athlete deserves the chance to compete without fear or being treated as other. Ultimately, I believe we need more nuanced conversations about fairness, inclusivity, and what it means to truly support all athletes regarding of gender identity. Finding a middle ground where everyone's rights is respected is key. As I conclude this journal for racism, religion, and gender in sports, I realize how deeply connected these issues are, not just in sports, but in society as a whole. Racism continues to affect opportunities and experiences for athletes. Religion remains a source of hope, especially for those facing hardship. And gender identity challenges us to rethink what fairness and inclusion truly mean in competitive spaces. These topics are not black and white. They are filled with emotion, history, and personal struggle. Through exploring them, I've learned that real change starts with listening, understanding different perspectives, and being willing to question our own assumptions. Sports reflect society, and if we want fairness and respect on the field, we need it everywhere else too.